In today's video, I'm going to be counting down the top 10 villains that I want to see in the sequel to Insomniac Games' Spider-Man PS4. As always, these are only opinions, and I'd love it if you guys could share your own in the comments below. Now, I will admit immediately that this list was quite a difficult one to do, which does have me a little concerned as to whether or not the sequel will live up to the original. But let's wind the clocks back to the PlayStation 1 era of video games. We had Spider-Man 2000 on the PlayStation 1, the Dreamcast, the you name it console at that time. The game was chock full of A-list Spider-Man villains that everybody loves, and the game was absolutely fantastic. It featured Rhino, Scorpion, Venom, the Lizard, Carnage, and of course Dr. Octopus, who would go on to become the nightmarish Monster Rock. Not long after, they released a sequel called Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro, obviously not to be confused with the Amazing Spider-Man 2 Rise of Electro. And it must be said that in that one, it just felt like they were scraping the villain barrel. They just didn't have the A-listers that the previous game had, and so it wasn't as well remembered or as well received. And it certainly, well in my opinion anyway, wasn't as good. In the original Spider-Man for the PlayStation 4, it featured the Shocker, the Scorpion, the Rhino, the Vulture, Kingpin, Taskmaster, Screwball, Black Cat, Mr. Negative, Electro, Dr. Octopus. Pretty much everything you could ask for from a Spider-Man video game. But what is at least promising is that this game did lay down some foundations for a sequel, one of which was the introduction of Norman Osborn, possibly going on to become the Green Goblin, Miles Morales getting spider powers, and it certainly looks like Harry Osborn is going to get the symbiote. So presumably off the bat, we can expect to see the Green Goblin and Venom appear in this game. I really don't think video games have ever truly done the Green Goblin justice, with the exception of the Spider-Man 1 movie tie-in game. And that was only because we got the chance to actually play as him. But while the movies have milked the Green Goblin for pretty much everything he's worth, the games have rarely touched him. He never appeared in any of the classic Spider-Man video games, he wasn't in Web of Shadows, he wasn't in anything like that. We only really fought Norman Osborn in Shattered Dimensions, but not actually the Green Goblin, and even then it was a very alternative version. In The Amazing Spider-Man 2, he was... well, it was The Amazing Spider-Man 2, you know? So with the exception of the Spider-Man 1 movie tie-in game, he really hasn't been done any justice in gaming. And heck, even in movies, many think that they still haven't got the character right yet. I'm personally fine with the Willem Dafoe version, but I can see why people aren't so fond of it. So maybe Spider-Man PS4 can finally give us the perfect Green Goblin. I mean, I trust them. I think they didn't do a single bad job of any of the villains yet, you know? They even managed to make Electro work. But then we have Venom, who's always been a bit of a show stealer when it comes to Spider-Man games. Spider-Man games love to use Venom, and you can see why. He's perfect for video games. He's a giant monster for you to just wail on. He has a skill set that matches Spider-Man, which always makes for a very high-stakes battle. I'm really grateful that they actually held off on Venom for Spider-Man PS4's first installment, so this time I'm a little more ready for it. But I will admit, I'm a little bit skeptical about the fact that they're using Harry Osborn, or seeming to use Harry Osborn as Venom. They've done that in the Ultimate Spider-Man TV series, and you just don't get the same connection. It's just not the same story. It makes me wonder if Spider-Man is going to get the black suit first, or if they're just going to go straight full speed ahead with Venom. But I do think Insomniac have made it pretty clear that they are going to be utilizing the black suit in some capacity in this game. So now that we've established who's definitely going to be in the game, unless the first game really was just deceiving us, let's get on with my top 10 list of villains that I want to see in the Spider-Man PS4 sequel. So in 10th place at the bottom of the stack is Eddie Brock. While it seems like a given that Venom will be in this game, there's no indication that Eddie Brock will. And unless they can really make Harry Osborn work as Venom and make that story really one that pays off and connects well, I would rather just see the classic version of Venom. He's the best fit for this kind of game. I'd also love to see Agent Venom get some love in a video game. Imagine how cool an Agent Venom video game could be. But I don't think Agent Venom belongs in a Spider-Man game, I think he belongs in an Agent Venom game. In 9th place is Tombstone, who could kind of fill the void left by Kingpin or maybe Mr.
Will you idiot?
What? Tombstone was already in the first game. Oh, wait, what? Well, you'd know if you'd 100%ed the game like everybody else. I have a job, and uni, and traveling. Wait a minute, really? They used Tombstone? Man, I really do have to scrape the barrel for this one, don't I? Alright, then I guess, like, there's no reason why villains can't return from the first game. I really hope that's not the last we've seen of Doc Ock, let's just say that. You really are a lazy YouTuber. In 8th place is the Enforcers. The Enforcers are kind of overlooked for a good reason. They're kind of dated, and they are far from Spidey's most interesting villains. They were kind of the ultimate filler villains in the Ditko era of Spider-Man. However, I do feel that Insomniac Games could do something seriously interesting with the Enforcers, as a means of sort of tying them into more of their side missions, so that you get some more actual Spider-Man foes to face in the side missions. And then there's the number of them. As opposed to being just a singular foe, they're an actual team. You could spread this out across the city and make something really big out of it. You could have them as hired goons for others of Spidey's foes in this story. Now, I realize that it does sound like I am scraping the bottom of the villains barrel so far on this list, but I'm starting off small because Spider-Man PS4 had some smaller villains in there as well, outside of the Sinister Six. So here we go. In 6th place, the Lizard. The Lizard has a great deal of story potential, because he's a savage monster that was once an ordinary man and still kind of is. It's kind of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of a situation. This could really change up the mission dynamic with him. Sometimes you have to protect him, and sometimes you have to battle him. It means there's a certain degree of balance that Spidey has to keep in this. It's a balancing act, and that's not something we've really seen that much of in the first game, and I think this would really distinguish it a little bit. The Lizard has appeared in previous Spider-Man games, but we really haven't explored that sort of dual personality of his, and how that can become kind of a double-edged sword. And it could be an excuse to send Spidey back to the sewers of New York, which, if it weren't for the flawed gameplay, would have been an interesting experience in the Spider-Man 3 game. And speaking of the Lizard, that kind of leads me to number 5, Kraven the Hunter. Kraven would be an ideal villain to pit against the Lizard. Heck, he's pretty much a threat to all of Spider-Man's rogues gallery, to be honest, as many of them are animal-themed. But thinking beyond that idea, I just think Kraven the Hunter needs to be brought up to date, and nobody has done it yet. They've tried a load of different things, from having him kill himself to having him be a TV show host, but I really just think this character needs an update from that stereotype that he is. And I think Insomniac Games would be the right people to do that. Get rid of the whole "I am Sergei Kravenov from Latin America" and replace it with something more dignified, and the template that I have in mind actually comes from Season 1 of the FX TV series Fargo, a sadistic mercenary called Lorne Malvo. Lorne Malvo commonly references nature and the animal kingdom for his philosophy, but he's an utterly malevolent force to be reckoned with, and probably one of the most intimidating TV villains I've ever seen. Like, take Lorne Malvo out of Fargo, rename him to Sam Craven or something, and stick him in Spider-Man PS4 Part 2, or even a Spider-Man movie. I would love to see this, as it's more of a philosophical threat and more of a human threat for Spider-Man, which we haven't really seen before. He's the kind of character that should be kind of an easy boss fight, but a constant catalyst for bad things going on. Kind of an easy man to beat, but a hard man to defeat, if you know what I mean. And he's the kind of character that could manipulate a lot of other characters into doing bad things for him. Which brings me to my next choice. Number 4, Clash. I'm surprised that not that many people really know of Clash. He appeared as a prevalent character in Spider-Man Learning to Crawl. The whole idea is that he's basically a massive Spider-Man fan that kind of tries to be his own superhero, but he's kind of down on his luck and ends up going into a life of crime almost by accident. I feel like his story here could be maybe that he was manipulated into it by Kraven. It would be fun to just have this innocent everyman sort of character just dive into the abyss head first because of a character like Kraven or something. And I think Clash would be the guy to do it. There's really not much to contradict when it comes to Clash because he's in so little of the source material. But he's got a cool design, his powers are pretty similar to Shocker, and there's nothing more interesting than a well-meaning villain. By the end of the game he could get redemption, or he could meet a very sad fate. This would give Spider-Man more of a moral dilemma on his hands as well, which could make for some seriously interesting storytelling. In 3rd place we have the Sandman. This choice comes from an almost purely visual standpoint, because I would love to see what Insomniac Games could do with Sandman graphically speaking. The graphics on Spider-Man on the PlayStation 4 are absolutely incredible. They are beautiful, they're so realistic. So I think the next big challenge for Insomniac Games would be to bring a character like Sandman to life. This could also make for some seriously interesting gameplay mechanics. Sandman is the kind of villain that could make for some seriously interesting boss fights with a lot of platforming in them, but they rarely utilize it. But Insomniac Games have gotten a lot out of their potential in previous games. I have every faith that they'd do Sandman correctly and do him justice. In 2nd place is the Chameleon. The Chameleon is one of a few Spider-Man villains that always make for a story that keeps you guessing, and that is one of the best things you can do in a video game with a story as lengthy as Spider-Man PlayStation 4. Chameleon is a a subtle Spider-Man villain. In fact, he's the first one Spider-Man's ever really faced. Imagine fighting a boss fight with another Spider-Man villain, let's say, and thinking, man, I've got it really easy. This is a really easy boss fight. But then it turns out that wasn't even the villain. It was just the Chameleon. This could create for a very involving story, and make for an enemy that's very difficult for Spider-Man to keep track of, and in turn, very difficult for the player to keep track of. And with a cast as big as the kind of cast you'd expect in a Spider-Man game on the PlayStation 4, there is a lot that they could do with Chameleon. When it comes to the Chameleon, the more characters, the better. And in first place is Mysterio. Now, if Chameleon was the subtle choice, Mysterio is the opposite of the subtle choice. The thing is, he's a pretty B-list Spider-Man villain, but has anybody ever noticed that every time Mysterio shows up in other media, he's an absolute show stealer? In the Spider-Man 2 movie game, he was the highlight of the game, because his antics were just so big and changed up the gameplay style so much. He just recently got his film debut in Spider-Man Far From Home, but it's probably going to be a little while until Spider-Man PS4 Part 2 comes out. But I think Spider-Man Far From Home showed pretty much everyone just how awesome Mysterio is, as he absolutely stole the show in that film and has gone on to become a fan favorite. Now, I'll say this, there were no shortage of trippy, incredible alternate reality sequences in Spider-Man PS4's first part. We had the Scorpion sequence where he poisons you, we had everything with Martin Lee, aka Mr. Negative, but I'd really love to see them go the absolute whole hog with that stuff with a villain that is designed from the ground up to do just that. And since they had so much fun with that in the previous one, well, it's weird to assume that Scorpion or Mr. Negative would be returning for Part 2, so Mysterio is the perfect man for the job, right? And as well as that, just because of personal bias, he's my favorite Spider-Man villain. He was hinted at in the first game when there was that kid in the Halloween costume as Mysterio. So I would really love to see the real one show up this time. What do you guys think? Comment below and discuss, and as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, don't forget to subscribe for all things Spidey, and in the description below are links to the Discord and the Patreon. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I've been Channel Pup, and I will think of a snappy catchphrase next time.